If you're considering buying freezer beef from a local farmer or rancher, but the cuts of beef and maybe filling out your cut sheet have you a little confused, then this video is for you. We're going to answer some common freezer beef questions, then we'll discuss where each cut comes from on a beef, and finally, we're going to fill out my cut sheet for this year together. If that sounds like a plan to you, stick around.
The Locker Beef Project, the Feeder Steers 2025. This project is winding down, coming to an end. These steers have about 20 more days till processing date. So 1 year ago, I made processing dates for 4 steers on February 10th, 2025. I've got 4 of these steers sold as quarters and halves, and 1 for myself as a whole. We'll let these guys finish their breakfast. Let's go fill out a cut sheet and talk about cuts of beef.
All right, inside, out of the cold. Let's talk about freezer beef. To start out with, I'm going to answer the 2 number 1 questions that people ask me when they buy beef from us. Number 1, I'm buying a quarter. Do I get front quarter or hind quarter? Usually that's not the case. This is definitely a good question to ask though. Usually, and this is what my processor does, they'll take a half of beef, and they'll split the cuts between the 2 people buying the quarters. My processor calls these split halves, and this is most likely what you're going to get. Question number 2, the second question I get the most often. How much beef is going to go in my freezer? And this all depends on the weight of the animal. Depends on that live weight and the hanging weight. A good way to figure out how much beef is going to go in your freezer is to use the 60% rule. And I got a video I made earlier right here about that. However, in general, your quarter beef is going to be about 100, 125 pounds, half beef, 200, 250 pounds, and your whole beef is going to be somewhere around 500 pounds of beef in your freezer. One other thing I just thought of to work out with the rancher or farmer you're buying beef from is who's paying the processing. I put the processing charge in the price of our beef. My customers just go to the processor, pick up their beef, and that's that. Just make sure everything's worked out and clear with the farmer or rancher you're buying beef from. Some farmers and ranchers might have you buy the animal from them, and then the processing is also your responsibility to pay for. Just make sure everything's clear. Well, those are the 2 most common questions I get, and something I thought of just now. If you have any other questions, please put them in the comments. I'll be glad to answer them. Now let's go over the main cuts of beef and filling out your cut sheet so you get everything you want and you know what you're getting. Cuts of beef. Let's start in the front and move backwards, starting with the neck. This is not a cut you're going to see on your cut sheet. Most of this goes to ground beef with the rest of the trim. Brisket is somewhat tough, fatty cut of beef can be turned into pure deliciousness by a pitman or backyard smokemeister. One thing to remember about brisket is its size. This cut of beef is hard to store in the freezer. If you do want brisket, but you are concerned about freezer space, ask your butcher to cut it in half. Moving back to chuck and shank, several good cuts here. My processor turns this section into arm roast, chuck roast, and the section closest to the rib turns into English rib roast. Arm roast and chuck roast are a perfect choice for the slow cooker. Cooked for 8 hours, slow and low, until they're fall apart tender. Chuck-eye steaks and English rib roast are something you're going to want to cook a little more medium rare. Think not quite rib eyes, but really good. Plate section. Short ribs and trim for ground beef. Flank, and not pictured in this graphic, skirt. Flank is a cut of meat that comes off the side of the belly, and skirt is actually the diaphragm muscle. Don't pass these cuts up, they make the best fajitas. Now we're getting into the good goodies, the rib section. This is the most prized primal on a beef. Prime rib roast, rib steak, or rib eye. This is where you're going to have to make some decisions on your cut sheet. These cuts all come from the same place, and you can't get them all. Rib steaks are bone in, and rib eyes are boneless. Make your choice. There's about 12 on a side of beef. Prime rib roasts are all your rib steaks in one big chunk. These are for special occasions. Think Christmas, Thanksgiving, or maybe Bilbo Baggins' 11th birthday. My processor will cut 3 rib or 6 rib prime rib roasts. When filling out your cut sheet, you'll have to decide what you want. Do you want rib steaks with the bone or rib eyes, boneless. Behind the rib section is the loin, sirloin, and tenderloin. Here's where you're going to have to make another decision on your cut sheet. Do you want bone-in steaks, porterhouse and T-bone? Or would you rather have the boneless version, strip steak and filet mignon? You'll get about 12 T-bone steaks on half a beef, 6 for a quarter. Also from the loin section, sirloin steaks and sirloin tip, 8 to 10 sirloin steaks and a half beef, depending on how thick they're cut. Round, round, I get around. That brings us to the round section. Leaner and meaner back here. Rump roast, stew meat, and round steak. Your cut sheet will probably have an option for plain or tenderized round steak. Organ meats and miscellaneous cuts. Liver, heart, tongue, oxtail, soup bones, and dog bones. Waste not, want not. And finally, ground beef. All the trim and any beef cuts you didn't select end up here. For a half beef, you'll get somewhere between 75 and 100 pounds of ground, depending on how you filled out your cut sheet. All right, that's it. We've gone over all the major beef cuts. Now let's fill out a cut sheet together. Beef number and kill date. That's just for the processor. I'm getting a whole. It's custom. Name, address, phone number, so your processor can get a hold of you if they have any questions. Let's get into these steaks. T-bone, or New York strip and filet. I think I want T-bone, and I want them an inch thick. 2 steaks per package. Rib steaks, bone in, 2 per package. And I also want prime rib roast, 3 rib. I'm going to put a note down here stating that I want 1 3 rib prime rib roast and the rest cut into rib steaks. Round steak, 3/4 of an inch, tenderized. I want sirloin tip, plain, cut in half. Skirt and flank, yes, please and thank you. Now, what roast do I want? Chuck, arm, rump, and English rib. And how big a roast do I want? It's good to give the butcher a range. 3 to 4 pounds. Ground beef, 1 pound packages. Regular. Now my miscellaneous section. Soup bones, yes. Liver, yes. Dog bones, yes. I don't like short ribs. I'm not going to get heart. I would like some stew meat. And none of this for me. And that's it. My cut sheet's done. It's a pretty easy process once you know the cuts and where they come from, and which cuts are either or choices. Thanks for filling out a cut sheet with me today and going over all the cuts of beef. It is a really exciting experience filling up your whole freezer with beef. Support your local farmers and ranchers and your local processor. Local supply chains are the way to go. Keep your money local and know where your beef comes from. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you had fun. If you found this information useful, like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next time at the Windmill Garden.